And the penny dropped. The penny dropped that Jesus, as a human being, never existed. I'm not sure where Christianity stands right now in the Indian subcontinent, and whether everybody is out to lunch with Jesus right now. But in the Western world, things have moved on, and there is considerable doubts regarding Jesus' existence and in any capacity at all. In the early days, I was accused of being a crank, and I really was embarrassing myself by suggesting that Jesus never existed. But today, the number of books written in the UK, in the US, across the world on the subject of Jesus and the dubious nature of his existence is quite overwhelming. There is a movement, a sea change in the understanding of the reality regarding Jesus. Now, it's a challenge. It's an enormous challenge to those practitioners of the faith who are promoting this religion, as all religions are, as the truth, as the one true way. And yet, if we ask a simple question, what is the evidence that this man ever existed at all? We draw a blank. Now, that's the reality. Yes, of course, they quibble, they dispute, they denounce that idea. They will tell you there are hundreds of witnesses to Jesus. They will tell you there's overwhelming evidence of Jesus. But it is the case that if you are dispassionate, if you are not committed to the idea that there was a savior of the world born 2,000 years ago, and that by the simple device of accepting him as your savior, if you do not do that, then you are damned. Well, there is no support at all for an historical Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that Christianity can't exist. It could exist on the fact, well, we just happen to believe it. Yeah, you can believe it. You know, you might believe an old religion like Mithraism, if you like, or you might believe in Santa Claus or the spaghetti monster. You can believe what you like, and I really don't care. Why would I care? You know, the danger is that you actually believe this story of Christ. You actually believe he's somehow active in the world even now as a spirit, and he tells you to do things, and those things are actually against the public good. In other words, Christianity is a danger. It's a danger.
Apparently, Brianna had moved on with the church organist Joshua Anderson Bell, and on Easter Sunday, things came to a head and a fight ensued. It is widely reported that the two began to fight, and Joshua pulled out a weapon and shot Denzel several times, in which, unfortunately, Denzel passed away from his.
It not only corrupts the minds of children, it actually leads adults into unhealthy, dangerous activities. And that would be hold true of all religions. All religions where you have an enthusiasm based upon nothing but your own fanaticism, then you are in danger of all kinds of mayhem. So I am happy with people believing whatever they like. Let them believe whatever they like, and that is not a problem. But advocacy of a particular religion, particularly an evangelical zeal behind that, is intolerable. It's intolerable to anybody who believes in rationality and in science and in evidence of reality. Live in your unreality all you like, but reality is what is the basis of the modern world. Religion actually doesn't give us anything substantial. Religion is a device from a primitive stage in history, and it lingers on because of ignorance, because of the lack of education, because of charlatans who are deceiving their customer base, and they obviously do very well out of that. So they are linked in with power structures, they are linked in with wealth, and they store these dangerous ideas, these nonsensical ideas. And why do people buy them? Why do they do that? Well, because most of the time they have no option. Most of the time, they are born into that world. They subscribe to the religion of their parents or their grandparents through generations, and are never given access to the information that makes them aware that this is a bogus and a fraud. So, okay, that is something of an introduction. You understand where I'm coming from, right? And this is not based upon the fact I grew up hating religion or hating Jesus. I actually believed Jesus existed. You know, he didn't threaten me, but he seemed to be some sort of character, except that when I was interested in history and studied real history, I was always struck by the fact that, well, Jesus didn't really seem to be there. He was never around. When you read Roman history of the first century, you'd actually read about Jesus. He's not there in the reality of what was happening in the Roman world. It existed in a separate ecclesiastical history. And then in that ecclesiastical history, you read of extraordinary events that could never have happened in reality. Miracle working, people rising from the dead. I mean, what nonsense, to any rational person. How can you now, thousands of years, 2,000 years after that supposed event, believe such a thing? But that, of course, is the requirement of religion, of the Christian religion, that it requires you to believe these extraordinary ideas. And it succeeds, of course, because nobody likes the thought of dying. Everybody would like the fact to be saved in the sense that they won't die after a very predictable period of time. You know, so it's a soft sell in a sense. It tells people what they want to know. Tell me everything will be lovely in the next world. Oh yes, says the priest. We will come along and Jesus will cure you. Jesus will put everything right. So let's move on from the generalities. Let's move on from these bold comments of mine. Let's look at why I would be so audacious to say there's no evidence, right? Why would I say that? Well, because there is no evidence. You know, well, if you start off looking, as I did, for the reality of Jesus, because I was intended to write a different book. I was intended to write a book about the Dark Ages. And I wanted to see, where did the church, where did that austere, parasitic organization come from? Okay, so you go back to the beginning. Go back, well, let's have a look what Jesus said. I went searching. What did Jesus really say in the beginning? And what do you discover? Well, there's no Jesus. Where is you find Jesus? Okay, yes, there's the Gospels. But apart from that, what is there? Well, there's not a lot. And nothing from the time. Yes, you go get people who themselves were Christians. You get people who were Christians a century or so later. They start to write the story. They start to write the story of how it all came about. And so then, apart from the real history, you get into a mythological history of what supposedly happened in Palestine in the first century AD. But when you go looking for that, let's say, what would you go looking for? You might go looking for the town of Nazareth. But was there a town of Nazareth in the first century AD? No, there wasn't. There may have been a farm there. There may have been a hamlet at most. But the Gospels speak the city of Nazareth. There was no such city. That city came along later. You know, probably in the 2nd, 3rd centuries, there was no city. So that you don't find this birthplace of Jesus, or rather the hometown, of course, because his birth was shifted somewhere else, but the hometown of Jesus. If you look at the places where Jesus supposedly did his wondrous deeds, they don't exist either in real history. The towns that were there, recorded by people like the Josephus, the Roman historian, the towns that were, they are not in the Gospels. Sepphoris, the biggest town, the biggest village, says Josephus, 4 miles apparently from the town supposedly of Nazareth. Sepphoris never mentioned in the Gospels, only this mythological little town called Nazareth that doesn't exist. And so the story exists not in the real geography of that particular time and place, but in a mythological story. Now, why would that be so? Why would someone put a story into a mythological landscape? Well, let's go back and say, well, who started this story? most scholars will acknowledge, will clear as day, the first of the gospel was Mark. Mark's gospel was the first. And that's interesting, and it makes a lot of sense, of course, because Mark is the shortest, and Mark's gospel is not full of a lot of extraordinary stuff that comes later. Well, who was Mark? Well, the interesting fact is we don't even know who Mark was. Even the name Mark was only ascribed to the gospel in the 2nd century. There was an anonymous document that gave some sort of salvic value to those who were oppressed in Judea, those who had suffered during the Roman war. And here was a story of redemption. Here was a story that the Lord didn't forsake us. The Lord is now present in the world, so he said, and people who accepted this new Lord will be redeemed because the kingdom will come. And this was something this was a story that could be shared among the desperate and the needy in a very difficult situation. For a moment, here was a story that could be read to these victims, Roman destruction and containment of Judea. So it was a story. It didn't necessarily suppose that there had been a real person. That's not very clear. For Mark, the Jesus character, quite possibly simply allegorical. He represented Israel. He represented the hope of Israel. So then that story gains currency, and later writers decide to update it, to make it a better story, a more comprehensive story. So perhaps 10, 15 years later, someone that we now know as Matthew comes along and he edits this document, he redacts it. If you doubt that, just compare the documents. 95% of Mark's gospel appears in Matthew. 95% of it. A lot of the words are identical. A lot of paragraphs are identical.